The Pittsburgh Steelers defensive line is the key for the Steelers six-peating as the leaders in the NFL in sack production. We're going to talk about the pass rush. We're going to talk about how this defensive line looks going into training camp and give you looks from all sides, including a new member that they signed out of free agency. We'll talk about that and much more right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things of the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find the show on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Odyssey, and YouTube. If you're watching this video on YouTube, hit the like button on this video. If you enjoyed it, hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel to get all of our daily Monday through Friday episodes, as well as our bonus episodes when we have breaking news content. We thank you for making the Locked On Steelers podcast your first listen every day. Okay, so we started our training camp previews with yesterday's episode talking about quarterbacks. Now, we're going to flip it to defense, and I want to start with the defensive line. Now, we'll get to their new signee, Doug Costin, in a bit, but I think the biggest thing that we got to talk about this defensive line is the potential that it has. Remember, last year, the Steelers did finish, one, with the most sacks in the NFL with 55, but two, with the worst rushing defense for the first time. And that's the first time the Steelers doing that for the first time since 1941, having the worst rushing defense in the NFL. That seems like a paradox when you look at that. But when you look at the strengths that this team has from last year, you see the pass rushing strengths that were on the roster. And yes, a lot of this predicates itself off of TJ Watt. But there's a key here that if this defensive line comes together and reforms itself after the struggles it had last season, it could be the key to not only making sure the Steelers have a sixth consecutive season because they're on a 5-year streak of leading the NFL in sacks. Not only are they the key to getting a sixth year of leading the NFL in sacks, but they also are may be a big key to making sure that this defense is elite again. Now, we look at this defensive line. I know a lot of people are talking about, well, Chris, isn't the key to getting more sacks TJ Watt? Yeah, okay, yes, he's the best. He's the best player on the team. There's no doubt about that. And I'm not diminishing TJ Watt's role in it. Also, if you're wondering, is Chris going to talk about the Madden ratings with Myles Garrett over TJ Watt? Not really, because Madden, I stopped. I used to be the biggest Madden head. You can ask my boys like Tariq Jackson and guys I used to play who were super into Madden. I crushed everybody. I was all about the game, and eventually I just got tired with it, and it was just the same thing over and over. And it's dumb, and the ratings were stupid, and I was just like, okay, this is ridiculous. And every year it just further confirms why I'm even playing the game. If you ever want to play me in a video game, see me in MLB The Show. I'm not that great at it, but I have fun with it. Anyways, the defensive line. I really look at Cam Heyward, and you see his leadership there. But the key here is going to be replacing what the Steelers used to have in the combination of stuffing the run and getting after the passer. And that's why they went and got Larry Ogunjobi. Now, Ogunjobi is a guy who had 7 sacks last season, just like Chris Wormley did. But Larry Ogunjobi is a guy who can produce in the run game, in run defense. Now, I've said this before on the show. He can produce there. His biggest weakness is when he gets double teamed, and when he's double teamed, he doesn't do a great job of kind of stunting that double team, taking it down or slowing it up so that it doesn't get to the linebackers behind him. If he brings that to the table, if he's able to at least just be that solid run defender and stay on the field and be that flip end pass rusher, that puts together so much for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Not just his pass rushing production, but the fact that teams, if they're not running the ball as well as they did last year, again, even if the Steelers aren't, top 10 in run defense, if they're top 15, that means there's going to be a lot more 3rd and 8s, 3rd and 9, 3rd and 12, 3rd and 14s, because the teams aren't just running the ball up and down on you. And they're having to go to the air in more desperate situations, and that gives the chances for the defense to pin their ears back. And you don't have to worry about as many, quick passes because they got to get the ball beyond the sticks down the field. That is one aspect of this defense that I think gets not talked about enough, because we everyone's excited about TJ Watt. Everyone wants to see Devin Bush and Miles Jack perform well. Everyone wondering what's going to happen with the cornerback room. But this defensive line, and there's 2 or 3 waves of it that we're going to talk about in this show. They got to be the foundation that sets that tone against the run and is ready to flip it against the pass. You know Cam Heyward's about that life. They're getting Tyson Alualu back. Big. Not because he's going to take all the snaps, but because he's a veteran. We know he works well with the team. When he's out there in the 3-4 next to Cam, and it used to be Stephon Tuitt, it'll now be Larry Ogunjobi. That's great. Those are your top 3 guys. Now, remember, the Steelers don't use the 3-4 as much as you might think. Like, for example, if you play Madden, you probably think, oh, yeah, 3-4, it's on their playbook all the time. Yeah, no. They use it maybe 33% of the time, but the more often they are in nickel, dime, some other variation of that where it's 2 down linemen. And in this case, it will most likely be Cam Heyward and Larry Ogunjobi as the first 2 guys, being the tone setters for the defensive linemen with your edge rushers on the outside of them. Now, I'm not classifying TJ Watt and Alex Highsmith as defensive linemen because technically they are linebackers, even if, Pro Football Focus and a lot of, more recent analytical minds and databases will log them as edge rushers, not as linebackers, because they don't perform the same role as a Devin Bush or a Miles Jack. But I digress. That's where this defensive line comes in. If they are not giving up the holes in between the ends, in between the edge rushers of Alex Highsmith and TJ Watt, you're going to give a lot of people fits. And again, if you're keeping Devin Bush and Miles Jack clean, 2 guys who I like their athleticism, that already is winning a lot of battles for the Pittsburgh Steelers, because you think about this situation. If you're not, you don't have to get to the pass to the quarterback every play if you're making it so that everybody else can. But at the same time, we know that teams are going to double team TJ Watt. They did it a bunch last year. And the Steelers need to be prepared for when they double team Cam Heyward, because that's coming too. But you can't double team everybody in pass protection unless you only want like 2 people running routes. Which means Larry Ogunjobi is going to have to win one-on-ones, something he's very good at. Alex Highsmith is going to have to win one-on-ones, something he's very good at. Tyson Alualu is going to have to win one-on-ones. I wouldn't say very good, but he's good at. And then whoever comes on that second rotation needs to be prepared to win those battles as well, whether that's Chris Wormley, whether that's Montrevious Adams, whether that's Isaiahh Loudermilk, whether that's DeMarvin Leal. And that's going to be an interesting battle to see who fits into that final group, because the Steelers typically carry 6 defensive linemen, interior defensive linemen, that are either defensive end, defensive tackle, however you want to classify them. That's typically what they carry, but they're not going to carry. They're going to carry more this year. They brought in these guys. These are all guys that are going to compete. So I want to talk about the guys on the back end. I've talked about the guys on the front end and why I think they're the key, stuffing the run and being those dual pass rushers that if you're an offensive line and you sleep on them for a second, they're going to crush you up A gap and B gap, and you're not going to stand a chance. Those guys are key to doing that. But every great starter on the defensive line needs great spell guys behind them so that they don't have to play 80% of the snaps. They can play closer to 70, 65 and have fresh legs come the fourth quarter, which is why the Steelers are investing so much into making sure that they have a really healthy defensive line competition. Mark Heyward, Alualu, and Ogunjobi as your guys on the top of that list. Behind them is where it gets interesting. We'll talk about that in just a second here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. But first, I got to talk to you guys about BetOnline. BetOnline.net is your number one source for all your betting stats and sports information. Find all the latest sports developments, league reviews, and news, including this year's Major League Baseball season, which is getting out of the All-Star weekend. That's going to be starting back up soon. If you bet on the All-Star weekend, the Home Run Derby, if you put money on Juan Soto, you are a happy camper. But it's picking back up again. The races are going to get tighter. The playoff stakes are going to start picking up in the coming months. Make your money on baseball by going to betonline.net, where you can learn about all the different edges, the odds, the things that you can do to help make the most money when you're putting money on baseball. Head to the website today. Use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in the action when you visit BetOnline, where the game starts. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm Chris Carter. We're continuing our training camp preview of the defensive line for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Now, I talked about the sack production aspect of it, the top end guys. Cam Heyward, first team All Pro, 10 sacks last year. That guy's a beast. He's a monster. But who fills in those second lines? Well, you're presuming Chris Wormley will be at the top of that list because he had 7 sacks last year, the third most for the Steelers in the regular season. Very impressive. Now, Chris Wormley wasn't as great in run defense, but when you can spell him more than you did last year, because again, Chris Wormley didn't go into last year thinking, oh yeah, I'm definitely the starter, because Stephon Tuitt was supposed to be there and Tyson Alualu was supposed to be there. Both of them go down. He's promoted to starter. It's a different situation. But now you get to play a little more situational football with Chris Wormley. And I think that's where he gets a better chance to be who he is and not have to be the forefront number one defensive lineman. Not that he's scared of that role. He absolutely is ready to take it on. We talked about that with him in the Steelers locker room when Stephon Tuitt's retirement was announced, because that was during minicamp. But there's still the element that's like, hey, you don't want to have to lean on this guy all the time. And I think that's where the Steelers want to have this healthy competition at defensive line to fill out these final 3 or 4 spots. Again, the top 3 go to Ogunjobi, Heyward, and Alualu. Wormley will get the 4th spot. DeMarvin Leal is making this team. I don't care what. He would have to bomb and have like terrible things happen to him off the field, or him do terrible things off the field for him to be removed from this roster as a 3rd round pick. DeMarvin Leal ain't going nowhere. So you presume he's the 5th guy there. But then it gets tricky. Who's your 6th guy, and do you include a 7th guy? Because if you're a 6th guy, you could say, well, Montravius Adams, right? Because he's a defensive tackle, and they kind of need more guys who are like traditional defensive tackles. But then you also have to consider, wait a minute, what about Isaiahh Loudermilk? What about Henry Mondeau? What about this guy Doug Costin that they just signed? There's going to be an interesting mix of guys who are going to be fighting for the defensive line spots on this roster. There's also the Davis twins. Don't overlook them. Now, I truly believe the Steelers are going to find a way to keep Leal and Loudermilk being 2 young guys that they're very excited about. I do think they find a way to keep them on Montravius Adams. And so that's where it gets tricky, because then you already have 7. If you're keeping those 3 and Wormley and Heyward and Ogunjobi and Alualu, that's 7 defensive linemen. That's already more than you typically keep. So it's going to be tough to then keep other players. But they added another player, and we did have a caller, Aaron from Colorado, who called quickly to ask Chris, who is this guy, Doug Costin? Here's Aaron.
Hello, Chris. This is Aaron Abeda, Grand Junction, Colorado. Longtime listener, first-time caller. I just got the news today about Doug Costin getting signed for a 1-year deal. Defensive tackle. He was USFL's supposedly a good player for the USFL, but I can't find a lot of information on him besides him playing for the Birmingham Stallions. Wonder if you might got a little more info on him and if he's potentially got a chance to be a starter. Thank you so much. Listen to you guys. You guys keep up the good work.
Thank you, Aaron, for your call. Always appreciate it. And remember, if you're a Locked On Steelers fan of the show, you can call in and ask a question to 412-223-6644. Just be sure to leave your name and where you're from, and keep your question to a minute or less, because we need that. That helps with production. But thank you. Thank you so much, Aaron, for your question. But to answer your primary question, no, Doug is not in the mix to be a starter. That is not the case. Now, if you think he's just USFL, you should look up his stats in the NFL, because he did start for the Jacksonville Jaguars for 9 games, but in 2020. He was an undrafted guy who came in, kind of rose up. It was when the Jaguars were on their last legs of that group that was there in 2020. In fact, he played against the Steelers in the game when Ben Roethlisberger faced off against them the last time. I think they threw a few touchdowns on him, but in the back end of the Steelers' 11-game win streak, I believe they faced off against him. So he played for them, and he's not anything phenomenal. but he's going to be a guy he's a hard worker, and I think that's what he reestablished in the USFL, because in 2020 he started 9 games, played in 12, filled in for the Jaguars, but it was a terrible team. You're not going to get noticed for just starting there and being a guy who gets 32 combined tackles, 1 quarterback hit, no sacks, and 2 pass breakups because he swatted them at the line of scrimmage. You're not going to get noticed for that. And then he only played in 1 game in 2021 and was then let go, and he played in the USFL. Now, USFL numbers, it's those stats aren't great to track. This he had 9 tackles and a half, a sack, I guess officially. There's the USFL is the USFL, it's whatever. But I do think it's cool when I did see the clips that I've seen of Doug Costin. He is a hard worker, and that's what Mike Tomlin wants. He says, hey, you're a veteran, you're in your mid-20s. Let's just bring you in, see what happens. I don't expect this guy to make the roster, and especially when you look at his athletic profile. I went and compared him again, using the relative athletic score. Thank you to Kenneth Platt at MathBomb on Twitter if you want to follow him and all his work with his tabulations of all-time measurements from combines and stuff of NFL players throughout the years. But I compared Doug Costin from his 2020 coming out year to DeMarvin Leal coming out this year, and he's short at 6'2", not huge at 291 in his weight. At least he wasn't coming out. His bench press back then was only 24 reps. Not good if you're a defensive lineman. You want it to be a lot more. You want him to have a lot of power. Not very explosive. Didn't have a good 40-yard dash. Had a terrible vertical jump, terrible broad jump, but did show agility and being the ability to be agile in his shuttle and cone drills where he had good times. And that's where I saw in the few plays that I was able to find of him, when I started just looking on Game Pass and just looking for plays that he made, I did notice that he was a hustler and that he would go, if a play was stringing itself out a bit, he'd chase a guy down and he'd be that hustle guy. That's what Mike Tomlin wants, because those hustle guys that, he may not be 6'5", he may not be explosive, he may not be, jump out of the frame, he may not have all the pass rush moves lined up, but hustle guys force the guys that you drafted to be that, like DeMarvin Leal, to be better, because then you say, look, if you can't beat this guy, you ain't never gonna make it. And if you don't beat this guy, in fact, we're going to give him playing time over you, and then you're not going to get the time that you need so that you can show us what you got. So to me, this was more of a depth add here, but this is going to be interesting on the bottom end of the Steelers defensive line. Who makes up this group of guys that are feisty? Because Henry Mondeau is a guy that they loved on special teams. He actually got 2 sacks last year, if you remember, and they love his athleticism, but just not consistent enough. Isaiahh Loudermilk, loved his fit, and I think that he started to fit the mold that they traded up in the 5th round to get him last year at the end of the season. And I'll tell you, when I saw him in minicamp and OTAs, dude looked a little more jacked. He looks like he's ready to show, hey, I do belong here, and you're going to want to use me more. Carl Dunbar, I think, has his hands full of talented dudes who are going to be able to fit different roles for the Pittsburgh Steelers. The question is, how do they fit those roles? How often do they use them? Who takes the primary spots? I think the biggest priority right now, if you're a Steelers fan, that you want to see is one, a DeMarvin Leal take steps up, be used more in that secondary rotation of defensive linemen than normally a rookie would be. Work his way up a little bit faster because of the excitement he has. You also want to see Isaiahh Loudermilk getting in that reps because he has the size. Remember, when they drafted him, they said, Carl Dunbar said straight up, he's like, we saw the exact same measurements as Cam Heyward. Not in the the on-field performance, but just body shape wise. And it's like, that's the guy that you want to see if you can develop from a late day 3 pick in the NFL draft into a Brett Kiesel type of starter who is a really good role player for you for years that you don't got to pay a lot of money to. And I think that's where Isaiahh Loudermilk is the picks up. But if you get those 2 young guys to become something developing there, remember the Steelers defensive line with Cam Heyward. I know Cam wouldn't like this if he heard me say it, but he's old because I'm old and we're about the same age when it comes to NFL terms. but bringing this up with that, they need the next generation of really good to great defensive linemen to start to come into focus. Now, I do think part of that will come with just them drafting defensive linemen in the earlier rounds. There's a good chance that maybe this next year is the year that they go and get a defensive lineman in the first round of the NFL draft. Who knows? I think there's the Carter from Georgia is supposed to be coming up this year. There's Kalijah Cansey from Pitt. There's a bunch of guys you could look up highlights on that you could be excited about for this next draft class of defensive linemen, and see if they'll pick them then. But it'd be nice to have at least two guys that are young in their early 20s who are forming into future starters that you can rely upon as playmakers. And again, they don't have to be sack masters right now. They don't need to get 5 and 6 sacks, like Chris Wormley and Larry Ogunjobi might. They just need to be competent, give you good reps to keep Cam Heyward fresh, to keep Ogunjobi fresh, Alualu fresh, whoever your top guys are, and make sure that they're not liabilities on the field. They're also keeping linebackers clean. And then in the fourth quarter, when it's time to turn it on, your starters are going out and they're fresh and they're ready to go. You put that all together, I think the Steelers Six-Peat as sack champions in the NFL, and it's a big piece of the puzzle to getting this defense back to being elite, which in turn is a big piece of this puzzle of getting this team back to the playoffs for a third year in a row. We got to take another quick break. We come back. I have another caller's question. It's not directly about the Steelers, but it's about the Deshaun Watson case, because we're now hearing rumors of what might happen. We'll talk about that in just a minute right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter. We're wrapping up our show. We did 2 segments about a preview of the Steelers defensive line for training camp. That's fun, right? Well, let's talk about something that is serious, and that's the Deshaun Watson situation. Now, a caller called in because there are rumors flying around, and I want to give our caller, Luke from New Jersey, who's called him before, a chance to ask their question, and we'll address this. But here's Luke on Deshaun.
Hey, Chris, it's Luke from Hunterdon County, New Jersey. I love the show. There's been a lot of news and speculation about the whole Deshaun Watson case. I was wondering if you could clear things up and, just give us a little sense of what you know about the case and how they'll handle it. I was also wondering if you had your own opinion on possible punishments for the Browns QB and how the proceedings will really affect the Steelers and the AFC North as a whole. Thanks for your time again. Love the show.
Thank you, Luke, for your question. Again, you could call into this show just like Luke and Aaron did today, 412-223-6644, or email us at losteelers.topicbag@gmail.com, attaching an MP3 file if you're international. But let's get to this question. First, this is in reference, of course, assuming they're called after this news. There was a report coming out of people who said they have sources that the Browns are bracing for a 2 to 8 game suspension of Deshaun Watson, which of course is a lot less than the full year suspension that people had been rumoring for months now. And there's a lot of outrage. There's celebrations on the Browns fan side because they're hoping to get their quarterback that they paid $230 million in guaranteed money to. It's not decided yet. We got to see how this plays out. But I want to clarify a few things about this situation before I give my opinion or anything like that. One, and I've answered this a few times on TV, radio, and in person when people just ask my thoughts on this. This is not don't think of this as a case or a trial in the typical sense. This is not a judge. Well, it is actually a judge is involved in this one, but it's a retired judge. But this is not like a criminal court case where a jury is deciding his fate or a grand jury is saying, oh yeah, you guys should go prosecute that. Or this is not. This is also not a civil court case. This is the NFL's system. These are their policies, how they want to handle it. This is them saying, hey, you know what? This is what we're going to suspend. And I think that's where people get lost up in this, is that they think that some people think that there's legal ramifications and what's the precedent on this. Understand this. When the NFL is doling out punishments, there's no precedent. It doesn't matter. They do whatever they want. Now, there's things that like technically are supposed to be breaking the rules, like Calvin Ridley. Everyone brought up Calvin Ridley betting on a game that he didn't play in because he was out for the season or whatever, and that breaking the code of conduct for the NFL because they don't allow gambling on NFL games. Cool, fine. That's fine there. But I've seen this league, and I've talked about this before, where they'll punish a guy for a slight block that might have been a little bit nastier, but they'll punish him the same way that they'll punish someone who does a complete blind side on somebody who's literally laying on the ground. And I mean, in the same week, I saw it happen when Juju Smith-Schuster blocked Vontaze Burfict in the one game and stood over him. They mind you, completely legal block, shoulder to shoulder, did it the right way, wasn't against the rules in any way. They punished him because he stood over Vontaze Burfict after the hit. Vontaze Burfict, of course, as you remember, if you're a Steelers fan, took out a lot of Steelers over the years. There was a sense of payback there. But same week, Rob Gronkowski is upset that Tre'Davious White has intercepted a pass in his face, and after White has returned the interception and he's fallen down, he's been tackled out of bounds, the play is over, he's laying down, Rob Gronkowski dives on top of the back of his head with his elbow and pushed it back into the ground. He also got a game for that. There's no consistency there. There's no way that you should say that Juju Smith-Schuster, who threw a legal block and simply stood over him after the legal block, should get the same punishment as that guy over there. It's arbitrary. They just throw stuff around. So understand this. The NFL is going to do whatever it wants to do based off of how they think the public will let them get away with it. Because the NFL is all about making money first. Don't think that there's some actual hierarchy here where they're thinking like, well, we have to hold these standards for the goodness of the people in the world. No. This was the same NFL that gave Ray Rice 2 games for knocking his wife out. And then when the backlash happened, they said, okay, he's suspended indefinitely because we aren't ready to deal with people being that angry. We didn't think it would make people that mad. And there's some people who think that the NFL will get that kind of a backlash if they give this little of a punishment. Some people think that, when you look at what Trevor Bauer in Major League Baseball, the guy's suspended for 2 complete seasons. And there was an anonymous NFL executive or coach or whatever that was quoted, I believe, by ESPN to say, like, if Major League Baseball is doing that and the NFL doesn't at least do a year, that's what message does that send about the NFL and what they think about women? Now, about the case specifically, there are 24 official allegations, I believe, as I understand. There are lawsuits that have been alleged. 20 of them, I believe, have been settled. So those are done civilly. There are still 4 outstanding that have to be, finished. It is up to the NFL to say, hey, this is the code of conduct, Deshaun. You breached it. There was the HBO Sports interview where, or on HBO Real Sports interview where Soledad O'Brien talked to multiple of the women who are alleging that Deshaun Watson, had sexually assaulted them, domestically abused, or not domestically abused, excuse me, that's the wrong term. But my point is, he did things that made them feel uncomfortable when that's not what they were signing up to do as masseuses. So being in that situation and how that's played out, Deshaun Watson, he's been arguing the whole time, hey, I did nothing wrong. I've never violated anything. I never raped nobody. I'm not on that line. I should be getting off scot-free. But and for a while, I thought his defense was very strong early on in the cases because every time that there was a news story about, oh, there's another accuser, when it was like 2 or 3 or 4 accusers, he every time his defense was, we didn't do this, I didn't do this, I will take this to court, I'm not settling. I'm not taking no deals. They want me to take deals. They want to take hush money. And that was a strong defense at the time. But when this got up to 8, 9, 10, 11, and now 26, 24, whatever the amount of accusers are, it is now, that changed the entire narrative, and that stance wasn't going to work anymore, which is why I think that they've had to settle on several of these cases and just get them done with, because Deshaun Watson needs to go make his money in his mind. So, all in all, if you think that there's going to be some moral judgment here by the NFL that's about trying to do what's right, I think you're going to be disappointed. They're going to do what they think is best for their profits. And if they deem that it's showing that it's punishing this guy who has been accused of these things by several people, and there's lots of lawsuits, and there's a lot of women who are our fans who don't feel comfortable watching him play anymore. If they want to send a message by punishing him and they think that's the best way to do it, they'll do that. But if they feel like, you know what, either we don't need those fans, or they'll get over it, they'll give them a lighter suspension, and you're thinking, you know what? Well, the weighing test says those people that are upset about this don't weigh as much as all the people that are going to watch our games, because Deshaun Watson is with the Cleveland Browns now, and they've got Nick Chubb and Amari Cooper and Myles Garrett and Denzel Ward, and that can be a Super Bowl team if he gets going with them. If they see that and they would think that weighs more, they'll make the decision to say, hey, yeah, some games, but you'll be back this season. From the latest reports, honestly, I've gone back and forth about this. I feel like with all the stuff, if I'm in the NFL, should say, hey, a year. Let's just give this a year. Let's come back to it. Hopefully all your cases are dealt with, and then it's fine. But in my eyes, I think they go the 2 to 8 route from like what we've been hearing lately, and then that 8 probably gets bumped down to 6 or 4, and then he's back by October, and but here's my big thing about this, Steelers fans, because this is the other part of Luke's question. I don't necessarily guarantee that Deshaun Watson, if he comes back in the middle of all this, I don't think it just guarantees that he just lights it up with the Browns and they just click right away. Not just because the team chemistry has to be there and that he hasn't played in a while in the NFL, but because I think there's going to be a dark cloud that hovers around them for this. I think that there's going to be some issues when people are going to keep asking about it, and it's going to be a continued story, and there's going to be people actively rooting against them. And I think there's going to be a sense of like, this could be a distraction to a team in an organization that doesn't handle distractions well. I mean, look at what happened with Baker Mayfield this past offseason and the season before. And now there's all these stories about how the team really didn't actually like him, and the players were kind of over his whole fake macho man bravado or whatever. This is a team that's a team and organization that needs things to be pristine and crystal clear, so they can get on the right foot and they can show, hey, we have assembled all this talent. We could do some really good football here and win some big games. But they're the Browns. How many times have they proven people wrong who have believed in them? After they beat the Steelers, and they beat the Steelers in the playoff game, I said on this show, I said on Locked On NFL, I said to Jeff Lloyd, who hosts Locked On Browns, they're not winning, they're not finishing higher than the Steelers. I said they might win 9 games. That's about it. And I was told I was crazy because, oh, you think they're going to regress? I'm like, they're the Browns. They'll find a way. Lo and behold, they won 8. Now, again, Deshaun Watson, I think he's a phenomenal athlete. I think he has the potential to be a top 3 quarterback in the NFL when everything's going right for him. I think he has a great arm. He's great athleticism. I think he sees the field well. And if everything was scot-free, if he was pristine, clear, and none of these cases were on him, I would be absolutely like, yeah, I think this could be a big problem. But I think that this is going to be a distraction, an issue that gets in the way of things for the Browns and the tempo they want to set for the year. So, what do I think that this does for the Steelers? I think it's just going to be like, hey, we got to face Deshaun Watson this week whenever they play the Browns, and they're gonna adjust to it. They're gonna do their best against it. They've played Deshaun Watson before. I think they'll be in a place where they can handle him. They can do well against him. And if the Browns aren't on their A game, I do think the Steelers would stand a very good chance at beating them in either of their matchups with the Browns this season. But again, we just got to see how the NFL decides to play it, because they can go in a lot of different directions. And remember, it won't be about what's right and what's wrong. It'll be about what's the best situation for their cash and their deals and their TV money. But we got more preview stuff to do later in the week. Tony Serino is going to be back tomorrow. That's going to be awesome. We're going to have a lot of things to talk about right here in the Locked On Steelers podcast. Thanks so much for riding with us. We appreciate all the Steelers fans who check us out every day, Monday through Friday on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Odyssey, and YouTube. So do keep checking us out there. If you want to support the show, subscribe to the YouTube channel to get all of our daily Monday through Friday episodes. Also, go to Apple Podcasts, leave us a 5-star review with a positive comment. You do both at the same time, and you get a shout out at the end of the show, like this person who left a 5-star review recently. We have Henry S. 0007, who says, great listen, 5 stars. Carter does a great job interviewing with insight and on the team and guests. Also knows where the AFC North and doesn't bring the hot takes or the bias. Keep up the good job. Thank you so much, Henry. Appreciate your 5-star review. And everyone else who gives their reviews, leave us a 5-star review to get your shout out at the end of the show here. Again, I'm Chris Carter. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Carter Critiques. Read my work at SteelersNow.com. I've been breaking down the Steelers. We power ranked the Steelers training camp battles. I wrote about the Steelers quarterback battle after I talked about it on this show. So do check all the work out at SteelersNow.com. Check us out here on all our platforms. Back tomorrow with Tony Serino talking more about your Pittsburgh Steelers right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast.